The name of this message is Rules for Pesach. We will begin with the preparations. This might surprise you, but the first step in preparing for and celebrating Pesach is to celebrate the biblical New Year. It is no accident that the verse preceding the Pesach celebration, which also begins the chapter, is about the biblical New Year. The first day of the month of Aviv is the actual biblical New Year, found in Exodus 12:2. This is the month that the children of Israel were led out of Mitzrayim, which is also known as Mitzrayim, or Egypt. Aviv comes from the root Av, which means father. More specifically, in Hebrew, the father of something is its origin. Thus, Aviv is the father or origin of our year. Aviv marks the beginning of our journey to freedom, Torah observance, and forgiveness. We could and probably should have a New Year's party on the first night of this month. However, this is not a biblically mandated celebration, and no day of rest is mandated. So if the party runs long into the night, you'll still have to get up and go to work the next morning. Hey, I'm just saying. Having this celebration would no doubt put everyone in the mood and mindset necessary to begin the actual preparations for the feast. So let's talk about those preparations. They begin on the 10th day of Aviv. On that day, you should procure a lamb or lambs, small or large enough to feed your family and all who intend to eat the Pesach meal. It is very important that we know exactly how many people will be attending our feast so that we will make the right purchase. If the members of an observant household are too few to eat an entire lamb, they shall share one, which includes the cost, with their nearest neighbor, it says in Exodus 12:4. This verse shows us that God does not want us to be wasteful. We shouldn't purchase 10 lambs just in case everyone shows up. We should know who will be there and purchase just enough. Don't be wasteful. That's the point. Also, if you say you're going to be there, you need to be there. This is not a command for God's children to live next to another observant Yehudim, because it says your nearest neighbor. Well, your nearest neighbor could be 3,000 miles away. You just need to keep that in mind. The easiest way, though, to comply with this law is to celebrate Pesach with our synagogue. The law is to procure a lamb, after all. We do not have to make the purchase personally if our synagogue is picking it up, because we have procured it if, in fact, we've given our money and someone from our synagogue takes care of the issue. We can pay our part of this cost on this day is when we're supposed to. But if there's something that's going to cause you not to get it there that day, for instance, you're sending it snail mail across the country, you need to send it before that day so that it will arrive on that day. Or if you know for some reason that you cannot pay that day, then you need to pay before that day. So the requirements for the lamb itself is that it must be a male. It can be no older than 1 year. It has to be without sickness, sores, or injuries of any kind. It is a lamb taken from a herd of sheep and goats. The sheep and goats were kept together, by the way. It must be a sheep taken from the herd, not a goat. Jacinius lexicon says it means female, but the Hebrew word in the text ends in im, which is masculine plural. So Jacinius is wrong, and Bible Works is also wrong. So it also teaches us that we must care for this lamb. Every observant family who procured the lamb is responsible for the care of that lamb until the 14th day of Aviv. That's from Exodus 12:6. It is acceptable for someone from the synagogue to take care of the lamb on our behalf because it's procured. It's not forcing you to purchase and do this yourself. Since Pesach usually happens during the winter months, poor families of the biblical age brought the animals into their homes during the winter time. so they wouldn't freeze. This later became tradition with many more traditions tied to it. So it is important to know the difference between tradition and mitzvah or commandment. Let's go through some acknowledgments that go with Pesach. The Pesach belongs to Yahweh, as noted in Exodus 12:14 and Leviticus 23:4. The Pesach, in fact, all of the feasts, but today we're speaking specifically of Pesach, they belong to Yahweh. They don't belong to you. They don't belong to the Jews. They don't belong to the Christians. They are God's feasts. The feast of Pesach is eternal. You shall observe the feast of Pesach, which is also called matzot, which is matzah, the unleavened bread. It's called both. It's either called Pesach or matzot. It is the same feast. That command that it is eternal finds itself in 6 different verses. The reason why we celebrate on this day is because it is the anniversary of the day that God led the children of Israel out of Mitzrayim. It's found in Deuteronomy 16:1. The lamb must be sacrificed at the place where God's name, his authority, his Torah, dwells. In other words, the temple or the synagogue. You can find this in Deuteronomy 16:2, 16:6, and 16:7. So it's obviously very important. But you don't find it until you get to Deuteronomy. Now understand that this is telling you exactly where the Pesach lamb is to be sacrificed. And then when we get to Deuteronomy 16:5, we find out that we are not allowed to sacrifice the Pesach lamb in our homes or any property we own, because it says within our gates. And within our gates are the places that we own and are in charge of. None of those places is it allowable for the Pesach lamb to be sacrificed. So if you're planning on watching the Pesach over the video with us and sacrificing that lamb in your home, can't do it. It is against God's law. What is the meaning of this? What am I trying to tell you? What I am trying to tell you is you have to go to your synagogue on Pesach. You have no other choice. That is God's law. Now, if you're just now finding this out and it's too late to buy a plane ticket or whatever the case is, what you have to do is make sure you do this next year. Because remember, you're not responsible for the laws until you learn the law. And this may just be too late for you to do something about it. But the law is you cannot do this just anywhere. It has to be basically in your synagogue. If you live in Israel and they've restored the temple, then you have to do it at the temple. But otherwise, if you're not in the land of Israel, even if the temple is standing, if you're not in the land, then you have to go to your synagogue. Those are the places where God's name, his authority, his Torah dwells. Okay. Now, there's something that might surprise you that's part of the Pesach, but all firstborn males, human and animal, are to be sanctified on the first day of Pesach. You find that in Exodus 13:2 and 13:12, by the way. This is also a command for every firstborn to make an appearance before his synagogue. That is, until the temple is in place, and of course that's only if he lives in Israel. So, on this day, if during the year leading up to it, you've had a boy born to your family, or you've had animals, male animals born to your animals, and it's the firstborn. This is the first day of Pesach, is the day that you have to redeem your son and either redeem or pay for the cost of redeeming your animal on this day. Now, every firstborn donkey, it also goes on, this is part of Pesach, every firstborn donkey will be redeemed with a lamb, which means that a donation of a spotless, less than 1-year-old lamb or the equivalent of the price must be offered to your synagogue. Of course, if you're in the land of Israel and the temple is restored, then that's where you do it. Otherwise, it's in your synagogue. If a person does not want to redeem the donkey, he must, of course, in English it says break the neck. Oh, how horrible that sounds, right? You got to know this is idiomatic. If the person does not want to redeem the donkey, if he doesn't want to make a sacrifice for the donkey, what he must do then is break the neck. What does that mean? It means that he must make that donkey a pet and never, ever let that donkey be used for work. That's what to break the neck of a donkey means. The firstborn males of humans must be redeemed. You can't make your children pets. I'm just saying. So again, when we're talking about the children, how is that done? How do you redeem your children? Well, the price of redeeming your children is the price of a year-old spotless lamb. Okay, so now let's go through the actual rules of Pesach. The Pesach meal cannot be moved. This is from Exodus 12:24. It must be eaten in one place, and it cannot be taken to another. In Exodus 12:46, it says we cannot break the bones of the lamb. Isn't that interesting, though? Does it make you think of Psalm 34:20? It says he keeps all his bones, not one of them will be broken. And if you're Christian, that should remind you of John 19:36. It says, for these things happen, fulfilling the ketub. What's the ketub? It's the scriptures. He keeps all his bones, it says, not one of them is broken. You see in the connection here? Now, it also teaches us, among the laws of Pesach, is that no congregation is exempt. Every edah, every synagogue in Israel must celebrate the Pesach. Okay, but Rabbi Allen, we're not in Israel. If you're Torah observant, you're in Israel. This isn't literally of the land. It's of the Torah observant people of God. That's Israel. So if you are in Israel, if you are among the people who are Torah observant, it's idiomatic, you get it, then you are not exempt. You have to celebrate. Those who cannot eat the Pesach, let's talk about that. No one who is uncircumcised and non-observant. They call that a foreigner in English. It doesn't mean that they're foreign in that they are someone who's from a strange land. Think about Abraham saying, I was a foreigner in a strange land, right? So we think, okay, so well, he was from Ur and he was in this other land. And so, no, it means he used to be uncircumcised. He used to be not Torah observant. That's the foreigner in a strange land. He was not in the land of God, right? He wasn't in Israel. He wasn't Torah observant. I hope you can get what's being said here. So no one who is uncircumcised and non-observant, no one who is a foreigner may eat the Pesach. Neither a hired nor a purchased servant is allowed to eat the Pesach. They have, unless they have been circumcised. So let's talk about this. A hired servant is somebody in the biblical text who you hire to do some work for you. A purchased servant, literally in the biblical period, people were purchased. This is true. But a purchased servant still received a salary. The same salary, by the way, that the hired servant received. But what made it different was that the purchased servant also received housing, clothing, and food on top of the salary. So it was a pretty cushy thing for them. This wasn't slavery as we think of in the West. It was nothing like that, not among God's people. At least it shouldn't have been. You know that there's always going to be an exception to it, someone who's not following Torah fully. But if they're following Torah fully, this was a choice, a life choice made by somebody to be a purchased servant, which meant you were going to work for that person for the rest of your life. That's really all it meant. And that's not really all that odd if you think of people who are lifers in the military or people who retire from some major corporation. It's basically the same thing. More like the military, though, because you're an indentured servitude. You literally belong to the military. You realize when you're in the military, if you get a sunburn and you can't work, you can be court-martialed because you damaged government property. I hope you get that. So it's almost exactly the same thing, probably where they got that idea from. So you need to know what those servants are. So if it's those servants, they cannot eat the Pesach unless, of course, they are circumcised. And it literally means circumcised of the flesh. But you have to understand what circumcised is to the Yehudim. Just because you're circumcised of the flesh does not mean you're circumcised of the heart. It doesn't mean that you're truly circumcised. Circumcision is only circumcision if it's of the flesh and of the heart. If it's of the flesh and not of the heart, you're not circumcised. You need to know that because this is a typical Jewish teaching of the biblical period. All right, so one other person who cannot eat the Pesach lamb is any male who is not circumcised. It makes no difference what the argument is given. You cannot eat the Pesach meal unless you are circumcised. So while there is not a law in the biblical text that says that you have to be circumcised to be observant to God if you're a Gentile who's converting to Judaism, here's the law that actually does say that you may not eat the Pesach if you are not circumcised. There's just no way around it. God does not change. There was no out given here. All right, so here's the outsiders who may eat the Pesach. If an uncircumcised and non-observant male, if a foreigner lives among you and wants to eat the Pesach, he, his sons, and the servants of his household must all be circumcised. His whole household has to be all in. They have to all be living according to the Torah. For somebody who is not basically circumcised and born and raised in Judaism, if you're not that, then you and your whole household has to be all in. That's what they're saying. It's an idiomatic way of saying if a person wants to convert to Judaism, he must be circumcised if he wants to eat the Pesach meal. Again, this is specific to the Pesach meal. Okay, then our law in Numbers 9:14 teaches us that everyone, convert or Jew, shall celebrate Pesach the exact same way. The idea between these laws, this one in particular and the ones that we just gave, is that God is no respecter of person. Nobody should be a second-class citizen. There shouldn't be a table for the Gentiles over there and a table for the Jews over here. That should not happen. So, let's talk about the first Pesach. And yes, there are 2 Pesachs every year. Well, if your congregation is real small, you might not have a second one. But if you're pretty large, you most likely will. You'll understand in a minute. The date of Pesach is set at the 14th of Aviv every year. The 14th day of the first month of our year. Now, we are on that day, on the 14th day, we are commanded to call the Holy Assembly, which also teaches us that it is not the rabbi's responsibility to make sure that you're there on the day you're supposed to be there. It's not the rabbi's responsibility to even put it on the website. Though I do that, it's not my responsibility to make sure you know what day you're supposed to be here. It's your responsibility because I'm not supposed to call the assembly until the first day. So you need to step up and be sure you're paying attention to that. Our next law is that no occupational work can be done during the holy assemblies beyond that which is necessary for prepping food. That would include, cleaning your dishes is part of the deal. That's part of your food preparation. That your dishes and all that need to be cleaned prior. They need to be cleaned during. They need to be cleaned after. All of it's part of the meal. I hope you understand. Taking out the trash is probably as well because it's all going to pile up if you have a big group over. Whatever is connected to the meal is acceptable. Nothing else is. All right. Here's one that's going to catch you by surprise, probably. It's in Deuteronomy 16:7. You will stay up all night and return to your dwellings in the morning. Deuteronomy 16:7. Bring an offering. It's in Deuteronomy 16:16. You will not come to Pesach without an offering. Now, this offering, by the way, it cannot come from your tithe and offering. It cannot come from your normal offerings. There is no set amount. Now, you have to pay for your meal, right? So let's say it's going to cost everybody $20 a person for the meal. I don't know if I have no idea what it really costs, but you have to pay that. It cannot come from your tithe and offering. Then you have to pay an offering, and that's whatever is on your heart. God's not going to give you a figure. That's going to come from you. You pay whatever you can. There's no set figure. If you want to write a $12 million check, you just go right ahead. So as long as it's not rubbery. But if all you can afford is $1, that's fine. But you cannot come to Pesach without an offering, and it cannot come from your normal giving. If you do that, you will have sinned. Okay. Here's one that might also catch you by surprise. Leviticus 23:8. You shall have a barbecue each day of the feast. This is a 7-day feast. So for 7 days, you have to barbecue food. You have to grill outside. All right. So let's talk about the laws that we all know, of course. We have to remove all the leaven. We have to take all the leaven from our houses on the 14th day at evening, and it has to stay out of our houses until the 21st day at evening, until the sun goes down on the 21st day. That's found in Exodus 12:15, 12:19, and 13:7. Now, we're not supposed to eat anything leavened during the Pesach, also called the Matzot feast. That's in Exodus 12:20 and Deuteronomy 16:3. You are not to be seen with leaven. No leaven will be found in all the places you dwell, and is in the places that are under your authority. If you live there, or if it's under your authority, none of those places are allowed to have leaven in them. So you need to make sure that those places are being cleared. For the whole 7 days, by the way, unleavened bread is called the bread of affliction, because it is the bread that reminds us of the affliction of the Mitzrayim. So, no, what's that stuff we call that cinnamon apple stuff? The choroset. No, God did not give us choroset so that it would remind us of the hard labor. He gave us unleavened bread to remind us of the hard labor. It's right there in Deuteronomy 16:3. Okay, so let's talk about people who are to be cut off. People who are to be shunned, if you will, among the children of Israel. Everyone who eats leaven during the feast, whether born in Israel or not, is to be cut off from Israel until the feast is over. Exodus 12:15 and 12:19. They cannot attend the closing celebration. They cannot attend Shabbat services. They cannot communicate with those who are faithful. Also, if a man is clean during the first Pesach and does not celebrate it, he is to be cut off from Israel. That's Numbers 9:13. It's just for the whole time of the Pesach, he's to be cut off. I would say that if you are clean and you've just decided that you're just not going to celebrate, then you should be cut off both celebrations, both the first and the second Pesach. That's just me personally, but the scripture does, at the very least, say that you're to be cut off during the first. Now, we're commanded to eat matzot, that's the unleavened bread, each night from the 14th until the 21st day, as a reminder that God brought us out of Mitzrayim quickly. This is also a reminder. So it reminds us of the hard labor, and it reminds us that we left quickly. Now, let's talk about preparing the meal. First, we start with the sacrifice. The lamb for each observant family will be killed as the sun goes down, as it's going down on the 14th day of Aviv. It's also called Nisan, which is the anniversary of the night that God brought the children of Israel out of Mitzrayim. The Hebrew text says Ba'arev Kevo HaShemesh, which means in the evening as the sun goes down, as I've said. The Yehudim of the biblical period talked about a little sunset and a big sunset. So as the sun is beginning to set, they called that the little sunset. And when it went fully down, that was called the big sunset. Just a useless piece of information there for you. Now that you've sacrificed the animal, now that you've literally killed it, you place... Literally, you're supposed to pour the blood from the animal into a basin, into a big bowl. Now, what I'm about to tell you about the blood, this is a one-time deal. You do not have to do this. But the first time there was a Passover, and I'll tell you why it's only for the first time in a minute, you had to cut the animal open, you had to drain its blood into a basin, and then you had to place blood on the doorposts and the lintel, both doorposts and the lintel. Once the blood was applied to the doorpost and the lintel, no one was allowed to leave their home until after the sun came up the next morning. And as you remember, in Deuteronomy, it says you have to stay up all night. You cannot go home until the morning. So you see how it's changed? This is how we know that this is a one-time thing. The blood was placed on the door only on the night of the first Pesach to physically keep the destroyer from killing the firstborn. It was a one-time thing, as I've said. So now the meal, the meat itself, the animal has been slain. It's ready to be cooked. It must be roast with fire, it says. It has to be cooked with fire. You are not to eat it raw. You do not eat it boiled in water. You have to cook the head, legs, and body all together. When you eat it, you have to eat it at night. You eat it with matzah, and you eat it with a bitter herb. Last year I got a little confused with this. I saw that the herbs was in plural, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to have several herbs. We went out and spent several hours trying to find the second bitter herb and failed. We couldn't find it. So we put several bowls of bitter herbs on the tables thinking that's the best we can do. I finally realized this time around I was looking at it and thought, oh, it's in plural because it's eternal. Hello. Forgot a little Hebrew grammar there. All right, so you eat the lamb at night, you eat it with matzah, and you eat it with bitter herbs, but you eat it with your belt on your hips, shoes on your feet, a staff in your hand, and you eat it in a hurry. That's Exodus 12:11, every bit of that. So then once the meal is over, we are commanded to burn the leftover lamb in fire so that no part of the lamb's flesh, it says flesh, will remain until the morning. So no, the bones do not have to be completely burned up. It's just the flesh that has to be gone. All right? So that's Pesach, the first night. Now the second Holy Assembly is to be called on the seventh day. It's the last day. You find that in 4 different places. It says again that we are to do none of our occupational work on that particular day. And that's really all for the second one. That's really all it says. But now let's talk about the second Pesach. The second one. If a person is not clean during Pesach, according to the laws of purity, you've touched a dead body, because someone in your family passed just before Pesach, it happens, and you've come in contact with the dead body, well, then you're not clean. Let's say you have a running issue, a runny nose, or you just cannot stop it, or the woman is on her period, or whatever the thing is. If you are ritually unclean, you are not allowed to be part of the first Pesach, which is why they have the second Pesach. If you miss the second Pesach, you're in a world of trouble. So you better make the first one if you're pure. Already we've been given a law that you must be pure. If you're pure and you don't go to the first one, you need to be cut off. So if you are not impure, you better be in the first one. But if you are impure, you will be able to go to the second one. That's from Numbers chapter 9, verses 12 through 12. I may have to fix that. All right, let's talk about what Constantine said about Pesach. Now remember, there's two Pesach, right? There's the first one for the people who are pure, and the second one for the people who are impure. Here's what Constantine said. And first of all, it appeared an unworthy thing that in the celebration of this most holy feast, and he is speaking in fact of Pesach, we should follow the practice of the Jews, who have impiously defiled their hands with enormous sin, and are therefore deservedly afflicted with blindness of soul. For we have it in our power, if we abandon their customs, to prolong the due observance of this ordinance to future ages, by a truer order, which we have preserved from the very day of the crucifixion until the present time. Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd, for we have received from our Savior a different way. A course at once legitimate and honorable lies upon our most holy religion. Beloved brethren, let us with one consent adopt this course and withdraw ourselves from all participation in their baseness. For their boast is absurd indeed, that it is not in our power without instruction from them to observe these things. For how should they be capable of forming a sound judgment, who since their parricidal guilt in slaying their Lord, not our Lord, their Lord, have been subject to the direction, not of reason, but of ungoverned passion, and are swayed by every impulse of the mad spirit that is in them. Hence, it is that on this point, as well as others, they have no perception of the truth, so that being altogether ignorant of the true adjustment of this question, they sometimes celebrate Pesach twice in the same year. Why then should we follow those who are confessedly in grievous error? Surely we shall never consent to keep this feast a second time in the same year. I'm just saying. All right, let's talk about the ceremony. In the ceremony, we are told in Exodus 12:26 and 13:14 that we are to teach our children to ask the following question on Pesach. In English, what they are to learn to say is, what is this service? In Hebrew, they say, Ma ha'avodah ha'zot. Let me say it slower. Ma ha'avodah ha'zot. What is this service? Now, here's the answer you'll give. I'll just do it in English because this is probably way too much Hebrew for you guys to learn, at least quickly. Here's what you say. This day is a day to remember. It is the Pesach sacrifice to Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Mitzrayim, when he struck down the Mitzrayim and delivered us in our homes. Because Yahweh did this to us when we came out of Mitzrayim. The Pesach meal will be something that gives us strength, and something we should always remember. The children of Israel were taken out of Mitzrayim so that Yahweh's Torah will be our main topic of discussion, because Yahweh brought us out of Mitzrayim with great power. By his power, Yahweh brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. And it came to pass, because Paro made it difficult for us to leave, that he killed all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, from the firstborn to the man to the firstborn animals. Therefore, I slaughter to Yahweh all that are firstborn males of the womb of all, and all my firstborn children I redeem. So he's telling his child that we slaughter for the sake of the animals, but we pay, we redeem our children. And it will give you physical strength and be the strength of your mind. For with great power Yahweh brought us forth from Mitzrayim. And it came to pass, when Paro let the people go, God did not lead them in the way of Pelishtim, that's the Philistines. For it was near, could have taken them through that land because it was very near. But God said, lest the people regret leaving because of war. In other words, if they went through the Philistine, they went through the Philistines, there would be great war, and God knew that so many of the children of Israel would just turn around and run right back to Mitzrayim. So that's why he didn't take them through this place. God said, lest the people regret leaving because of war and turn back to Mitzrayim. And God turned the people to the way of the wilderness of the Yam Suf, that's a reed sea. And the children of Israel went in groups of 5 out from the land of Mitzrayim. And Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, for he, speaking of Joseph, swore an oath to the children of Israel, saying, God will reconcile with you, and you will carry my bones away with you. And they journeyed from Sukkot, not the celebration of Sukkot, but the town of Sukkot. They journeyed from Sukkot and set up camp in Etam, at the edge of the wilderness. And Yahweh walked before them during the day in a pillar of cloud, and led them on the path by night in a pillar of fire, a light for them to walk by day and night. I want to come back to this. And Yahweh walked. He did not remove the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night in the presence of the people. And Yahweh walked before them during the day. His left leg was a pillar of cloud, and his right leg was a pillar of fire. God walked before the people of Israel. I am finished.